Okay, so now we're going to talk a bit about some of the challenges. If I can welcome to the stage a wonderful panel. Claire Slater, Artistic Director of High Tide, Shubha Das, former Creative Director of the Liverpool Everyman, Rachel Bagshaw, Artistic Director of the Unicorn, Jennifer Tailfer, a Carbon Literacy Trainer and Production Manager, Matthew Zia, Artistic Director of ATC, and Liam Sinclair, Exec Director and CEO of Dundee Rep and Scottish Dance Theatre. And, as if by magic, here we all are. So, many of you, when you filled in your information for coming, submitted challenges that we're all facing, and then more have been submitted today. So what we're going to do is go through some of those. Our wonderful panel are going to respond, and then we'll also throw out to the rest of the audience to get some of your thoughts on how we address these challenges as well. So, welcome. This is exciting. I'm working between a digital and a binary world. So to begin, what can a director actually do? The Green Book is mostly used by production managers. Directors are left out of the conversation.
Well, I think read the Green Book, actually. Because if you are being left out of that conversation as a director, that's troubling. What we're talking about today really is change of systems, change of structures, changes of how we do things. And change is often resisted, not intentionally, but just because people are used to working in certain ways. These are the deadlines, this is how we structure our season, this is how we get into tech, and so on and so forth. So you will always encounter resistance to change. And hey, people love saying no to artists. So in exactly the same way as I've always wanted to know exactly how a budget works, so that if I'm told no, I can check if that's really a no. Similarly, kind of engaging with the Green Book and understanding the detail of that in a very ruthless and selfish way just kind of helps protect the vision. More practically and fundamentally, if the director can't put climate into the conversation within the creative process, who can? Now, if as a director, whether that be of an organization or a freelancer, and it's differing tensions across those two fields, but if something is blocking your ability to put it on the table and ultimately give permission and create safety for other people to join in that conversation and acknowledge that it will be hard and it won't be perfect, but that actually, because it's the thing you do when you say, I'm a director, I'm going to take some of that heat. I'm going to be the person that actually shoulders some of that discomfort, actually, for everyone else within the hopefully generous, joyous process of making the thing. But yeah, give that permission, is what I'd say. Anyone else?
Okay, another challenge. Tight budgets mean there isn't enough money for the additional time and labor needed to reduce environmental impacts. They're all doozies.
I think I might take that one if that's okay. So I work at High Tide, which is a small theatre company, and really lucky to be MPO funded. And thank goodness we are, but certainly the budgets are tight, but I suspect almost everyone in this room represents a version of that story. And when it comes to money, I think it's really important to remember, actually, that climate care can sometimes cost a little bit more. It can also save you quite a bit more. And I think it's about navigating your way between those two different things. And fundamentally for me, I try and think about how we apportion a budget or how we mentally separate out that money, and increasingly at a production level or at an organizational level. I'm more interested, and I'm sure a lot of you in this room are too, in thinking about money more towards people and less towards stuff. And I think it's just about shuffling those pots, whatever size the pot is to begin with, to think about that principle. So we can try and find buy more time for people to spend longer thinking, talking, learning like we are today, sharing, researching, all the stuff that and it'll take more time right now as well. I think whilst we're in this moment of transition, it will take more time, so we need to buy that time, respect that time from people, rather than, I think, the stuff, by which I mean, I guess, materials and other things, and just slightly shift that so we're respecting the actual human beings who are making the work. That's, I guess, my fundamental starting point when I think about money.
to that as well?
Please.
Absolutely.
Claire, I think it's also what we think about as what value the stuff has. So I think in our industry we've got this, we've kind of traditionally had this view of kind of the sort of the seduction of newness being the thing that we want. You know, what we want to see on our stages all the time is something new, something new. And when we think about the stuff, if we've had this sort of aversion to things being reused or seen before. And if we switch how we think about stuff being used and kind of have a conversation with ourselves about how the stuff itself might be able to kind of collaborate with us in a different kind of way, then perhaps we might also be able to shift how we think about money around kind of particularly, I suppose I'm thinking about stuff on stage, but you know how we kind of view what money is used for, I think. Yeah.
Brilliant. And elegantly following on from that, low pay and short lead-in times mean there's not enough time to find pre-used materials or to work in a way that means they can be reused afterwards.
Can jump in on that one. Yeah, I mean, time is money, isn't it? Money is time. And it does always feel like there's more to do in the same amount of time. Even as a society, the efficiencies we've been creating haven't actually given us more space. They've just mean that we try to do more in the same amount of time. You could almost say we've been primed to do that. We're just, things are supposed to be like this now. And it's tricky. I think one thing I do want to pick up on is what Gemma said about this becoming second nature. I think there's going to be a transition period where we're figuring out how to do this. We're learning different ways of working. We're learning what different materials do. Where do we get them? I think that's a temporary thing. We will learn. We will find ways to do that. But reuse does take more time. You've got to find it. You've got to make it good. You've got to get it there. And so that thing about focusing on people, I think where possible, increasing the lead-in times so that people have the time to do that work, have the time to have the discussions, bringing in production early. They may know where those materials are available. And I think also considering how people are working across shows. Can someone do, as either a PM or a designer or a director, more than one show so they can start to see the correlations? I know of some organizations who don't have internal workshops. They will contract a workshop for their whole season. So that workshop is now looking at what materials can cross over. I think we're still working in a linear way where we decide how to create it, we decide how to maintain it, and then we decide how to get rid of it, usually a couple of weeks before the strike. And so how can we perhaps think less about time and more about timing? So what is the timing of those conversations? And I think the only way to make an environmentally responsible show is to have the conversation about where it's going before we make it. So actually the conversation about removal and disposal happens at creation stage, because that's the only way to then know the materials we're choosing we can then remove in an environmentally responsible way. And maybe that's even involves money. Maybe that means moving the money allocated for disposal into build. Maybe it becomes a build, maintenance, and disposal budget. Yeah.
That's wonderful, thank you. Anyone else on? Onwards we go.
Sorry, Lorne, I was just going to say, I mean, you know, importantly, coming into this year, the Arts Council did say to all NPOs, you can reduce your activity by 15%. I think there's a real question as to how many organisations have taken that up and in what way, because finding that time and where that decision-making is set is super important. So that is about executives and boards and actually really using disruption to get out of that repetition.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's something in that, Sugar, actually. I relatively recently moved to High Tide right about a year ago, and prior to that I was always working in venues, in buildings, where we were always in rehearsals one piece, something on that night, you know, we all know the model. And for the first time I now have the privilege of working in a touring company where we don't have quite the same expectations of constantly making work. And I have no answer to how those who run venues and buildings can respond to that, but it is a major knot to untangle. I think we were talking about this earlier, right? But the joy of running a company where you can take a little bit more time. So what can smaller companies like us, how can we share that learning with buildings. I don't know, but there's maybe something in it.
Yeah. What are the parameters that are kind of forcing that production line? Is it brochure deadlines? Is it et cetera, et cetera? Let's interrogate those. Dismantling those will help.
That's great, thank you. The feeling that we as a sector, are being asked to do a lot when other industries have a larger carbon footprint and are much heavier polluters.
Yeah, that's true. And I think we all feel a sense of comparison that immobilizes us and makes us go, well, any gesture, any action is slightly worthless when compared to, I don't know, kind of much bigger industries that have heavier pollutants or are less kind of aware of their carbon footprint or less considerate about their carbon footprint. And I think we want to make significant actions, don't we? And we want to have impact, but I think the impact is made collectively through many, many, many small gestures and small actions. I was thinking about the phrase, death by 1,000 cuts. And I thought if we could attempt healing by 1,000 plasters, really small, and we all start to care about it. And then I can't remember which supermarket said every little helps, but it's the same idea, isn't it? It's that same thing, like it has to be collective. And I guess the way we're thinking about that Actors Touring Company is how can we do as little harm as possible in the creation of a piece of art through the materials, through our transport costs and our transport impacts. How low waste can we be? How low waste is it possible for a tour or a production or a project to be? What processes can we change as individuals, as organizations? And what standards can we and should we be setting for ourselves, again, as individuals and organizations? So recently, Actors Touring Company, all of our sets since 2020 have been repurposed, recycled. The set for Rice went off to 20 Stories High. When they'd finished with it, they gave it to a local Merseyside-based young company, youth theatre. Family Tree, the set for that, we just put it out on social media that we wanted it to go somewhere. So it went to Living Theatre, who run a rural arts festival in Herefordshire. And again, we ensured that the transport costs and impact were as small as they could be. So we finished our tour in York, and that set went to Liverpool. We finished our tour in Bristol, and that set went to Herefordshire. It wasn't about coming back to London, storing it, and then sending it off elsewhere. So I guess the question is, what is within our power, and to never feel kind of immobilized by comparison or measuring ourselves against other industries? What can we do individually? And I was talking to Zoe Svensson, who has helped pull this all together, about a small statement. Family Tree is a play about extraction from black female bodies and extraction from the soil. So actually I was really thinking, kind of keyed into what Amanda was talking about, what did she call it? Environmental social equity. And so there are some notes to the makers in here, content, casting, setting, props, costumes, and then it says sustainability. The production should be low waste with as light a carbon footprint as possible in all aspects, including props, set, printing, travel, etc. And then this is a line I just find absolutely kind of incentivizing and beautiful. Otherwise, the staging will contradict the content. So anyone who makes this play, going forward, it's there. It's part of the instruction about how the play should be made. So yeah, what standards should we be setting for ourselves?
Thank you. It's such a beautiful and powerful thought of where is the contradiction and how do you allow yourself to not tolerate the contradiction in whatever power or responsibility you're able to exercise. Theatre directors have very little power to make change, very little power to make real change. And there's no way of changing a theatre's standard practices because as a freelancer, you don't work there for long enough.
I'll take that one. As a freelancer, no longer freelancer, I'm 2 weeks into the job at the Unicorn. I'm sort of very much in this transition phase of moving from a freelance period into an organisation. And so I think I've been having this kind of conversation with myself as a freelancer, like what impact can I have on a building? Have I been able to have on a building as a freelancer that I'm now in post as artistic director, and how does that shift and change? And to some extent, obviously there are some big major changes there, but I don't think the question to myself has majorly shifted. I think we as it's picking up on some of the things that Shuba's talked about, that Matthew already has. We as individuals do have agency. We have, and I'm aware as I talk of the privilege of choice in here. There is privilege in being able to choose who we partner with, who funds those organisations, you know, who chooses to put on our work on their stages. There is a privilege of choice in what I'm talking about. However, we do have choice in the way in which we engage with those organisations. We can ask questions. We can think about the questions we want to ask a building or a theatre organisation with whom we're working. It makes me think a little bit as well about every little helps, about the kind of micro macro. So thinking about the tone and the kind of ways in which we work in our rehearsal rooms. So when I think about kind of my practice in my rehearsal room, one of the little shifts I made a few years ago was about when I have a meet and greet with a building. So I now do that not on the first morning. And so I move it either to the afternoon or the next day. And what that's done is enable the collaborative process to already begin in the room. This is not radical, loads of other people do it as well, but it's given space for me and the people I've got in that room for us to really set the tone, to agree how we're going to work together, so that when a building comes into the space, it's not a building welcoming us into their space. It's us going, come into our space. This is how we're going to work. And so for me, there's a question about how we as directors have that conversation with buildings. Go, this is how I'm going to work. This is where sustainability sits in my practice. And so if you're going to work with me, that comes with me. These are the questions I'm going to ask you about who's on your board, who's funding. It's made me think about Kate's brilliant list there, but the purpose, the networks, the governance, the ownership, the finance. How do you, as a freelancer, how do we as artists engage with an organisation at each stage of those? Who is the representative, the trustee who represents nature on their board? Does that organisation have that person? Ask the questions. It is, you know, healing by 1,000 plasters. This isn't going to happen overnight. And it might be that your relationship with that building is a moment in time, and it's, you know, 10 directors asking those questions that make that impact. But it's that's going to chip away at it and take time, and for all of us to kind of play our roles in that, I suppose.
Which is also about evaluation cultures.
Yeah.
And the simplest thing a freelance director can do is ensure they have an evaluation conversation after a production, ideally with a trustee. That's very simple, very practical. Yeah.
Can I add in as well?
Sorry, Jen, go for it.
No, you go ahead. So fine.
I was just going to reflect that I think that's such a brilliant rally call, Rachel, and I also have a feeling that organisations are desperate to hear it, and so it's actually a perfect moment to bring those two things together, to say, I really care about this. Oh my God, so do I. You know, I think for a wee while we've thought that neither side does care, and actually I think absolutely everyone does, and now we're naming it, and we can pay attention to that. So I hope deeply that that would not be met with anything other than absolute joy.
I was just going to add in that I think this is where actually the Green Book is so helpful, because it's giving us that common way of doing things. So as a freelancer going in, it's not like, oh, what are all the different parameters I have to meet in this venue, or how do I work with this organization? It's like we're working to a Theatre Green Book baseline standard. Producers, directors, everybody knows what we're doing, and that is, I think, part of the power of the Green Book. So while there may be different ways people come up, oh, we should use this spreadsheet, I think feeding that kind of thing into case studies so we can build the book is the key, so that we are all working, we've got a template that we can all communicate through.
And therefore, obviously, should be on production meeting agendas. Every building, every organisation who's in this room, that probably already is happening. But as artists, also, is it in your contract? I check as a theatre, put sustainability and engage you with Green Book in my contract, and if they haven't, I want it to go in my contract. So again, thinking about how we have that conversation with an organisation.
I think that's so important that the contract binds us all.
Yeah.
It's not about the obligation put onto the freelancer, it's the mutual responsibility.
And can I add, actually, publicly. Is that okay? Just so that you can then pass that on. Yeah. And I think that's a key bit of this whole conversation is the power directors have to then make those demands, ask those questions, and then in turn pass that on to the creative teams and the actors and the stage management that you bring on. It's then it's something that flows through all of us. I think it's so fundamental that directors lead this climate leadership conversation, but climate leadership can be enacted by all of us, whatever role you play. It's just about giving the permission. And Zoe would brilliantly say it's about giving the permission. So you're asking for permission, and then it's your job to flow that permission through.
Absolutely. This takes us nicely from sort of that to a more macro challenge. Theatre is built on a growth model. Success is measured in ticket sales, ever bigger sets, companies making larger scale transfers, and international touring.
I'll jump in on that one. I love a bit of growth chat. I took the opportunity to come down last night and stop off at York, and I saw Play for the Living in a Time of Extinction. And there's a brilliant line right in the sort of first 15, 20 minutes of the show where they say, we need an honest conversation about climate. And we absolutely do at a kind of macro societal level, but we really do, I think, in the theatre sector, because it has been built over recent decades on that kind of growth paradigm. And so on the kind of macro level, we know that there's not really any credible way that an economist or a climate scientist has come up with yet to decouple endless GDP growth from climate emissions. So we're going to have to think about what growth means differently. And I think the massive opportunity that's been touched on already is the stories that need to be held in order to do that. And that's where we all come in. But to do that, we're going to have an honest conversation with ourselves. And I think if we cast our minds back to the kind of pandemic period, there's some truths in there that if we sit with them and sit with the uncomfortableness, there's actually lessons in there. So one of them on the topic of extinction is, I'm going to put it out there, we've got an extinction of theatre buying audiences, ticket buying audiences. They're still not back to pre-pandemic levels. Is there an opportunity in that to think differently about that? Now, Jekyll and Hyde moment, you've got to balance the box office, so I get that, I really get that, looking at the spreadsheets, but is there an opportunity to think differently about the way in which people consume theatre and what the value of that is? International transfers, there's a kind of pinnacle thing of once you've got the international transfers, heck, once you land the gig on the Olivier stage, you've really made it. And how does that intersect with our notion of our local communities? And then if we can sit with nature as a collaborator in that conversation, I think that was touched on earlier, there's an opportunity to approach it in a playful way and to do what we do, which is to figure things out all the time. But pretending there's not a need for an honest conversation and pretending that there's not a really awkward thing for theatre to sit in is not going to, I think, help us be that kind of transformative force that we can be in what society has ahead.
Picking up, this leads again on nicely from some of the points you're raising, particularly around the challenges of touring and of moving work from one place to another. People don't have time for slow travel, especially actors. Touring shows is problematic in terms of environmental harm.
I suppose I'll come in with some of my story. When I was at High Tide, we were part of the creation of something, the Anti-Racism Touring Rider, and Amanda Parker was part of the development of that as well. And it was just about actually looking after people better and taking a bit more time. This word care has come up a heck of a lot. And actually, I think about, so we want to move people around, we want to move them around in less harmful ways. That requires more planning and attention. So that takes us back to this thing of how are we centering our organizations around care and, adopting KPIs actually in relation to that perhaps challenge the relentless kind of, well, we're talking about the bottom line and that's our only measurement that we're reporting on. I mean, we're all reporting as organizations. So, how do we report back on actually different types of intervention that aren't pound signs? Equally, you mentioned Headlong's Play in York, different ways of touring ideas. So harnessing that creativity, and I'm sure we've got lots of that coming up at High Tide as well. What that might mean for, yes, taking international ideas, but actually working with local collaborators to find new meaning and new relevance, and actually brilliant audience development. and all of that sort of stuff. So I think there are creative opportunities to find within that. And I don't think it should be the end of international touring, because that would be really sad for our understanding of how all of this is actually affecting people elsewhere.
At ATC, we're currently working with the ITER, which is the International Touring and Environmental Responsibility Programme, which is a research and evaluation programme. 10 Danish organisations / freelancers and individuals with 10 UK, the same. So we've got like China Plate in there, ATC are in there. There are also some individual makers. And what we hope at the end of this program, which is about a 9-month program, a funded program of research and exploration, is that there's more knowledge and learning that is then available to others about international touring and how we can start to kind of, again, head towards a lower waste, greener way of touring across borders.
Yeah, just on the KPIs, we had a bit of a conversation internally at the rep this week just about balance sheets, and there's been a lot of work about alternative balance sheet models. It would be great to think about the theatre sector really taking that on, so that we express in that kind of really pivotal document a set of accounts which can make or break a company. Those value points that you're talking to about, because it's so important, and we fundamentally, I think, believe them in our hearts, but that we get trapped in this kind of corporate discourse of how we have to express our value that is just not us, really, in so many ways.
The ways in which we share that working while we're doing it as well. It feels like everybody's engaging in the same time in the same ways with these really difficult challenges, and you're so head down doing it that either asking for help or finding a way to usefully share the thing you found or the interesting way in which you've messed up is really important as well. Access. Environmentalism can often come at the expense of already historically excluded groups who already have to work harder than more privileged peers.
I'll take that. Having talked about privilege earlier and privilege of choice, I'll talk about, I suppose, the flip side of that. I think, I suppose it's firstly just to acknowledge that everything that Amanda said at the start of this, that actually when we're talking about these two areas of thinking about kind of access and equity and the climate are not separate. We all know this, I hope, in this room, but they completely intersect. And we see that globally. We then see it also, I think, in terms of how we engage with and how we talk about and how we talk to different groups within our own sector. I think it's really important to acknowledge the social context in which we're each making work, or the social context you are making your work in at each given time. So thinking about the context where you're making work and who you're engaging with. Obviously, I'm going to talk a little bit from my own perspective about access, and time keeps coming up over and over and over. And of course, a lot when you're starting to think about physical access or access in terms of disability, extra time is really a great big thing that you're often asking for. When you put that together with the Green Book, when you're starting to think about how that intersects with the changes we can make to make our practices more sustainable, of course, the two things start singing together and make total sense to think about at the same time. They start making things better for everyone. And so I think it's less of us starting to think about these two things as separate issues. The situation we're in right now is because on some level we're trying to reverse 400 years of European colonialism. Like, these things are completely entwined. And so to stop thinking about them as separate issues, to start thinking about how they talk to each other, how we can collaborate within that kind of Venn diagram and use the intersections of those things to make things better for all of us. I think that's it.
No, I didn't on that. Because it's when I'm running the carbon and climate literacy training and look at two different sort of models, and one is sort of a Venn diagram where there's this moment where the finances and the people and the earth sort of intersect in the middle. But it sort of then also visually implies that one doesn't affect the other. And so the sort of new model is this idea of you've got the earth, and nestled within that is our people, and then nestled within that is the finances. And they're all so interconnected. And so having a conversation about an environmentally responsible show without acknowledging the effect that may have on the people who are trying to source these things or make this thing happen, it is so interconnected and important that we, as Kate said, we're so embedded in this. We're not separate. And that's one of our fundamental issues that I think we've got an opportunity as artists to explore, is that we've separated ourselves from nature, and actually we need to re-embed ourselves. And stories around that I love, yeah.
Class and wealth. It's much easier for wealthier people and better resourced theatres to reduce their impact.
I'll have a crack at that. I think one of the ways I think about how we can solve the climate crisis and the role of theatre practitioners in that is that it's a crisis of empathy and how we can feel more with our hearts and then connect with people who are the most affected by that crisis. But I think there's also a kind of head part, which is it's a kind of resource crisis and how we think about resource. And I had this kind of really key moment during COP26 a couple of years ago, where one of our team at the Rep did this talk as part of an event in Dundee. And she was really open that she's a single mum juggling a number of part-time jobs. And then she walked through all the ways that that makes her climate sensitive because of the way she has to think about resource. And there was this kind of like light bulb moment in the room where people went, it's not just about the empathy piece necessarily or feeling sorry for anybody. It's actually who's got the knowledge and the expertise to solve this. So there was a kind of really transformative conversation that spun out of this about people literally going, can we ask you, what do you do? How do you manage your energy efficiency? And it was really quite a kind of empowering moment. So I think if we can be empathetic to one another, there are real clues that are about including, but also the skill and the knowledge that people have who are in different places, socially, geographically.
Anyone else on that one? Onwards we go. Wanting the production to look great and be green is often seen as a contradiction.
I'll say something on that, which is that's nonsense. Really. I mean, you know, if the only great thing that somebody could say about your show is that there was this sort of sparkly backcloth or whatever, that's probably a problem. And certainly Peter Brook would probably have some points to make about working within kind of increasingly limited design parameters, but it's a question of taste. I had the great privilege in my training to spend time at the Motley Design Studio, and you sat in crits, which were kind of reviews of designs that the student designers had created, and the formidable and terrifying Alison Chitty would just strip it all down. Why do you need that? Why do you need that? Why do you need that? The amount of designs that ended up a single chair on a model box. It's kind of mind-blowing, but it's, I think that's a very odd question. I think a different question is it might feel like from the text that you need quite a lot to actually just do the thing to tell the story. And sometimes that's very much the case. I think a thing we need to hold onto and hold dear, what does the space give us anyway, full stop, that's already there? An incredible lighting rig, actually, how might we use that to its best advantage, what's there already? But also that when we make theatre, as opposed to making a film or writing a novel, we're really inviting audiences in. That's part of the exchange, it's part of what this thing is, to use their imaginations to complete the image, because it's not naturalistic in any way, shape or form. And there's so much joy and collaboration with an audience to find in that. So, you know, I kind of, I question the question.
Lots of colleagues say they care, but see sustainability as an add-on that can't be prioritized.
Oh. Who's on that? It's not me again, is it?
No, no one fancies that one?
No, I think it's just that it sort of sums up the entire day in a funny sense. Maybe that's why we're all owning that one. It can't be an add-on. We're all living, I don't need to tell this room, we're all living through a time of climate crisis. So every show that we make, no matter what it's actually about, whatever the play is actually saying, it is existing in the time of a climate crisis. There isn't an add-on, it's just an act. I think, deeply believe it's an artistic act we all need to practice now, which pays attention to that context and makes sure that we are crafting and surrounding those shows with true environmental action. And I have a quiet query, I know some of us in this room do, about that word sustainability, because it sort of implies business as usual. And actually, I think it's something more along the lines of environmental action or climate care or sort of a proactive, artistic act. So maybe that's why we all hesitated, because it feels like the question is the embodiment of the day, really.
I think also just thinking about this sort of lots of colleagues say they care as though they're sort of somehow outside of us. You know, there's some of those people, we might be some of those people, it might be some of us in the room, but also thinking for those of us who run organisations or buildings, who is involved in those conversations within your organisation, thinking about that as a freelance artist, who's involved in those conversations when you're making the work? So how, again, do you set up your rehearsal room, your organisation, so that that space is equitable, so that everybody is able to engage with it wherever they are situated within the process? So again, it's not just sort of something that's held in production meetings or in the creative team, but actually, again, there's an acknowledgement in the way in which the work is made with the actors in the work that front of house do, that everybody is engaged with it across the organisation, giving people opportunities to care and engage with it.
Yeah, and it's an add-on if we let it be an add-on. If we decide that we want to move it to the centre of every bit of what we're doing, then we can do that. I was thinking again about Amanda's work within CARTS and making sure that EDI was being conscientiously thought about and budgeted on every single project so that it had to be discussed at every single meeting. Thinking about what Kate was saying, I think about nature being represented around the board table. Was that Kate who said that? I think it was, yeah. So again, it can either be on the outside or it can be core principle. And I think that, again, setting our own standards, one of the standards is that we move it to the centre of conversation and don't let it be some sort of outlier.
Sorry, after you.
No, just that there is, and I think a challenge within that, and perhaps what I detect within this question, is fatigue, actually. Everyone has a lot to consider at the moment. We're in a cost of living crisis. A lot of people don't necessarily want to come to work to engage in a certain kind of deep questioning. And yes, it's fantastic to invite your facilities team in to kind of have those conversations as well, but perhaps that's not what they come to work for. So there is a leadership role there to actually own that and actually find for your organization, for your rehearsal room, for your context, what are the things that I implement and put in as a standard, which mean that other people don't have to think about it and be exhausted by it. And what then are the spaces for conversation? How do I curate that so that it's actually meaningful?
And I want to clarify a little bit about what I talked about, because I don't think that an opportunity to care means labour. It can be to ask questions of the organisation. It can also be, that's your job, actually, in this context. It's about context and, yeah.
One of the things that I remember reading in Zoe's report from the Donmar is this idea of which speaks to what you're saying, not just setting an expectation, but then facilitating that and what's being put in place to make sure that those people coming to work who want to engage have a way of doing it and understand what they're being asked to do as well. Yeah.
And I think that expectation is really helpful if it is framed as we can figure this out together. Like nobody's got the immediate answers necessarily. So sometimes it is just about sitting in the space that creates an opportunity to work together and figure it out.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating at the moment looking at work being made around the country and watching how the ever-presence of the tension, the aesthetic concern, the dialogue is increasingly present in work that doesn't have an overt link to climate, and the understanding that our audiences, regardless of the day, the piece of art, whatever it is they're engaging with, are also carrying this context and this conversation intersectional with everything else. So how does the step into the theatrical experience become a secure place to sit in that deep insecurity? And what does that feel like in the way that we communicate what theatre is as a collective space as well? Perhaps we're almost at time, so just as a final question, art and ethics are seen as separate. Many feel you can't make good art if you also attend to ethical issues.
I just repeat Schubert's statement earlier of that's ridiculous. Every piece of art is made with absolute ethical thinking about who's engaging with it, what messages are in it, how are we making it, what care are we putting into it. I'm not meant to, I wasn't going to take that one, but I just thought it was ridiculous. What a ridiculous statement.
Yeah, I mean, what? Yeah, what are we bringing people together for?
Brilliant. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you. There's a huge amount of this. There'll be more coming back to the challenges during the breakouts during lunch as well. So thank you all for contributions and thoughts to that. Thank you.